right, everybody. We are back doing number 6 of the Untold story of the New Testament church. And if you can hear that music in the background, I had this wild idea. Well, I should play the music of the times while I'm doing this. And so obviously a reproduction, but this is supposedly the kind of music they were listening at during these times. If you want it to continue, say something, otherwise I may turn it off. We're starting off here where the apostles leave the presence of the Sanhedrin bloodied and bruised, but they are rejoicing because they were counted worthy to suffer in the Lord's name. Can you imagine getting beaten like that and rejoicing? They did it though. And Jesus warned before his death and resurrection, he said, "But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and in their synagogues, and they will scourge you." That was Matthew 10:17 through 20. Conflict in Jerusalem. The Greek-speaking Hellenistic Jews began complaining about the Hebraic Jews, the Hebrew Jews. Each day the food is distributed to the needy members of the assembly, but the Hellenistic Jews feel that their widows are continuously neglected. Thus, the ecclesia, the church in Jerusalem, faces its first internal crisis. To solve the problem, the 12 gather the whole ecclesia together, and they explain that they cannot devote time to this issue of deciding where the food goes, since their hands are full ministering the Word of God. Therefore, they instruct the believing community, the ecclesia, to choose 7 men from among them to oversee food distribution. The ecclesia is pleased with the idea, and they select 7 men, all Hellenistic Jews. They are Stephen, Prochorus, Parmenas, Nicholas, Timon, Nicanor, and Philip. This may not seem like much, but shortly you're going to see where Stephen and Philip playing to something I didn't really realize this is how this transitioned through the Bible when I read, but you'll see how you did it. The ecclesia presents the 7 men to the 12, and the apostles lay hands on them with prayer, and I think this is an important moment right there. Stephen, which one of the 7 we just talked about, shines and is martyred. Stephen, one of the 7 who helps with the food distribution, begins preaching Christ in the city. He also performs miraculous signs, confirming his message outside of the 12. Stephen is the first person in the assembly to show evidence of being called to God's work. Saul of Tarsus hears Stephen preach a radical message, a message that declares God is uncontrollable and cannot be manipulated or confined to the temple. The Almighty's true dwelling place is not human-made. The Hellenistic Jews argue with Stephen, but they cannot stand up to his wisdom or the spirit by which he speaks. So they secretly persuade some of the people to falsely accuse him of blasphemy against God's temple in the law of Moses. The Sanhedrin seethes with such fury that they grind their teeth at him. Stephen looks up to the heaven and sees Jesus standing at the right hand of God, the Father. Christ is cheering Stephen on, waiting to receive him as a victor. When the Jews hear Stephen say he sees Jesus, they cover their ears, scream at the top of their lungs, and drag Stephen out of the city in a mad rage, and they brutally stone him to death. Stephen, and this is where I said it was going to be important that these 7 deciding food were more than that. Stephen is the first martyr for Jesus Christ. The earliest firebrand beyond the 12 is now gone, but his tribe will radically increase. So the first person to actually get martyred for Jesus wasn't one of the 12. It was Stephen, who was one of the 7, who was appointed and laid hands on by the 12 to help with food distribution. I think he took his responsibility a little further than food distribution. The ecclesia is transplanted throughout Palestine. Saul of Tarsus, which is somebody we just heard Stephen do this, is a young man almost 30 years old. He is well-known Pharisee, witnessed Stephen's death. In fact, Saul guarded the close of Stephen's execution, showing his full support of the brutal slaying. Let's see, Saul Paul would later rehearse his conduct when writing the Christians in Galatia. To escape persecution, the ecclesia in Jerusalem disperses throughout Judea, Samaria, and Galilee. Some even flee as far as Damascus, Syria, a city 130 miles north of Jerusalem.
All of our cars on Carvana Value Tracker
stop
on
that.
all our devices.
Hang on a minute.
Yes.
I've been looking for my phone for
Values.
Don't need that. All right, so, and for the first time, the gospel is proclaimed outside of the city of Jerusalem. So this is important because basically what happened with the martyrism of Stephen, everybody's starting to feel more persecuted, and boom, they disperse, which now the gospel is getting preached outside of Jerusalem. So big time. And let's see if I can find us a date now. Should be one coming up here shortly. I didn't do this stuff because it was stuff that I'm pretty sure you recall from the Bible. Philip the evangelist. Philip, one of the seven, this was also one of those seven, travels to Samaria and preaches the revolutionary gospel of the kingdom to a city in the region. His preaching is confirmed by miraculous signs, healing, casting out of demons. Philip is the second person who preaches the gospel outside of the 12. Stephen was the first. A community is born, a kingdom community is born in Samaria. Now we're looking for a date. This is AD 33 to 37, so a 4-year gap, but this has been shortly after Jesus died, and this is, I believe, when Saul is going to become Paul. So again, I'm not going to read you a lot of that because, you know, he was persecuting the Christians. Jesus came to him in a vision. He got blinded, you know, sealed later. So here we go. Saul remains blind for 3 days, during which time he neither eats nor drinks. Saul grows more powerful in his preaching. He baffles the Jews by skillfully demonstrating from the Hebrew scriptures that Jesus is the Messiah. But not long after, he vanishes to Arabia for a time. In Arabia desert, God prepares Saul for his special calling. Following the pattern of Elijah, who went to Mount Sinai, Saul communes with God in the desert. Through divine revelation, Jesus gives Saul further light on his calling and commission. Barnabas shares Saul's dramatic conversion with Peter, and the apostle is convinced. So Saul stays with Peter for 15 days. He also meets James, the Lord's half-brother. One day, Saul visits the temple to pray, and the Lord appears to him in a trance. Jesus tells him to leave the city because the Jews will not receive his testimony. The Lord also tells Saul that he will be sending him far away to the Gentiles. As a result, the believers bring Saul to Caesarea Maritima, 64 miles northwest of Jerusalem, and they send him by ship to Taurus, his hometown in Cilicia. At this time, Saul begins traveling throughout the regions of Syria and Cilicia. Peter travels throughout Judea, AD 37 to 39. Soon I think we're going to stop here. Let's see if I got a place marked. I do. This is it. AD 40. Cornelius, a Roman centurion, dwells in the predominantly Gentile city of Caesarea Maritima. Cornelius is a God-fearer. He also a man of prayer and benevolence. At 3:00 p.m. in the afternoon, Cornelius receives a vision of an angel, instructing him to invite a man named Peter to his home. The next day at noon, Peter prays on his rooftop. Side note here, it is possible that Peter Cornelius' story took place in AD 39 instead of AD 40. Either way, the dramatic story took place about a decade after Jesus rose from the dead. He became hungry and falls into a trance where he sees a vision of a sheep falling from heaven. The sheep contains unclean animals. Peter hears a voice saying, "Rise up, kill and eat. What God has cleansed, do not call unclean." The vision occurs 3 times. The meaning of the vision is that God has included the Gentiles in the saving work of Christ and the sanctifying work of the Spirit. So in other words, this is the first time that now they are seeing that, yes, the Gentiles and Jews, all who accept Christ, are all part of the same body, and that all the Jewish rules they were following before, like foods that were unclean that they couldn't eat, are no longer a rule. Acts 10:13 through 15. In Judaism, there was a messianic expectation that when the Messiah came, all the animals once declared unclean would be pronounced clean. That was one of the other footnotes. So I think we're going to end it there for today, and we'll start you up again next time. Hope everybody's having a wonderful Sunday, and have a blessed one. We'll talk to you soon.